Okay, hello. I would like to welcome everyone to the Sacred Parenting Summit, where parents of adolescents are discovering ways to awaken personal power, both within themselves and their kids. And today I'm here with Kelley Johnson, who is an expert in a field that is probably one of the most powerful aspects of human nature, yet oftentimes leaves people feeling extremely disempowered. And so welcome, Kelley.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Adina.
So tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
I'm a clinical sexologist, and that means I have a PhD in human sexuality, and I practice in the realm of public health. I've been a sex educator since 1989. It was my very first job. It's all I've ever done in my career. And I work with teens, children, parents, aging people, anything related to the topic of sexuality. I do education around.
Wonderful. And how did you become interested in clinical sexology?
When I was in graduate school studying public health, the AIDS crisis had started. And at the time, it was very narrowly focused on gay men and drug users. And when I was finishing up, all of a sudden we recognized that it's not a minority population, which we tend not to give enough attention to. Mm-hmm. And so I had the opportunity to work in a small hospital, educating the community and the staff around AIDS. And I loved it. Talking about sex is something I'm really comfortable doing. And that's basically what a sex educator is. Somebody who can talk comfortably about the positive aspects of what you said in your opening is kind of at the core of who we are as human beings.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. And it's such an important thing to talk about and one that people really struggle with. And so why do you think it is so hard for people to have conversations about sex?
I think it's historic. I think it's passed down from family to family. Our parents weren't comfortable talking about it. Their parents weren't comfortable talking about it. There was a lot of shame around it. Yet we live in a dichotomous world where sex is used to sell everything, yet we have all this negativity around sexuality. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what makes it uncomfortable. I think also many parents aren't educated themselves. So when they get asked questions, they're uncomfortable because they don't know the answer themselves. Mm-hmm. Probably because their parents didn't talk about it. We don't do sex education in our institutions, schools, faith communities, things like that. So we have one side of the spectrum where negative sexualized images are coming at us right and left, and then the other that we're just really uncomfortable talking about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And there's so much fear around it and discomfort. And I'm really hoping that our conversation today can bust through some of that and help parents feel a bit more comfortable having those conversations with their kids and helping their kids develop healthy sexuality and a positive mindset around it. And so let's talk for a second about that. What is healthy sexuality?
First, I think one of the things I want to clarify is when a lot of parents think about sexuality, they think about sex, the act of sex, without realizing the really broad umbrella that sexuality falls under. So we're talking about things like body image, self-esteem, gender identity, gender stereotypes, sexualization, sexual orientation, human growth and development, family, pregnancy, self-care, reproduction, pregnancy, values, equity, fairness, consent, all of those things. So it's a very broad topic. And I think when parents think, how do I raise a sexually healthy child? they just think about the act of sex. So it's much broader than that. But you asked, what is a sexually healthy child?
What is healthy sexuality? What does it look like?
Well, for children, it's being able to use the correct terminology. It's being comfortable in their own body. They don't feel shame or guilt about their body. They understand boundaries, which starts at a very early age. They feel like they're capable of giving love as well as receiving love. They develop compassion and empathy. They see loving attachments around them. They know that they can say no to touching, and they know that they can have their questions answered when they have them. And I think that goes along with adult sexuality. Understanding those things, feeling comfortable in your own body, but it really starts in childhood.
Absolutely. And that's kind of why I asked that question, because it is such a broad range, and healthy sexuality isn't just having a good sex life.
Right. It's way, way beyond that.
Right. And so, many parents are approaching this topic from a wounded space.
Yes.
A place where they have their own hangups and issues for whatever reason. Some more severe than others, but it can be tough for people. And so I'm wondering, what suggestions or advice do you have for parents who are coming at the topic of sexuality with their kids from that wounded place?
I think that's a really common stance. And I think raising your child to be sexually healthy helps to heal the wounds that we carry, because we're breaking the cycle. And so I would encourage parents to take a deep breath, get some good books for their kids, read those books with them, and in the process, heal their own misunderstandings about sexuality.
I love that. I think that's so just so needed and so important. And a lot of parents get triggered when their kids start to mature physically, get to reach the age of puberty, and they come to that point physically. So what thoughts or suggestions do you have for parents who are uncomfortable with their child's physical development?
Take them to see a sexologist. Take them to classes. If you're not comfortable doing it, just ensure that they're getting the information. And when they have the information, they may come to the parents with a more positive attitude than the parents have, which then can help to heal as well. When I work with parents, I think one of the big mistakes we make is that we wait until 10, 11, 12 to talk to our kids about the changes that are going to take place. And in my opinion, that's too late. Because by the time a child enters puberty, the peer influence is going to become heavier and heavier, or stronger and stronger. And so the bond that parent and child have created has happened between 0 and 10, and that's the foundation to guide through puberty. But if you've not had that open discussion and that communication and talks about the way the body works, why parents like to go in their bedroom and shut the door, that it's very hard to start at puberty, to start having those conversations. But if you've created that foundation early on, then the door is wide open, and kids will be open with their parents, will come to their parents with concerns, with questions, which may have nothing to do with the child themselves. It may be something they heard at school that they don't understand, they saw on TV. And so it's really important that parents don't overreact and freak out. Do your best to keep your composure, and answer those questions based on your family's value system.
Yeah, I think that line of communication is so important. And I think going back to parents being concerned about their child's physical development, I think it's also important for parents to realize that when a girl develops breasts, or when a boy starts to get facial hair or things like that are a sign of that maturation, it's not all about sex. I think
No, it's not.
Freak out and are like, she's becoming a sexual person. Well, she's still just a child. And so to kind of remember that a changing body doesn't change everything like overnight all at once.
Right. And that child was a sexual human being before they started puberty.
Yes.
They were aware of their gender. They're aware of reproduction. They're aware of how they feel in their body. They're aware of how they form relationships.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a continuation, but with now an interest in romance, attraction, things like that.
Mm-hmm. And possibly attention from others.
Yes.
For their bodies that they didn't have before,
Mm-hmm.
which is, again, something to have a conversation about. What do you say to parents who are like, oh, I don't need to do sex ed at home because they get that at school?
What they get at school, most schools are the basics, the plumbing, how the plumbing works, how not to get pregnant, how not to get an STD. And like I said before, it's way, way more encompassing.
Mm-hmm.
It just goes so far beyond that. We see it on the national stage right now, in the way that our politicians are talking about equity and discrimination and fairness. All of that is related to sexuality. Mm-hmm. And you can bring that in and use the news as talking points and jumping off points to talk about sexuality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great suggestion. And, in our modern era, a lot of parents worry about access to pornography. And that's like the number one fear that gets expressed or comes up mm-hmm. when parents talk about their children's internet use. And it feels inevitable. Mm-hmm. Our kids these days are going to encounter images or things that we aren't prepared for them to see always. Mm-hmm. And so what suggestions do you have for parents in dealing with that kind of inevitable exposure that can happen through the internet?
This is, I think, the biggest reason we need to be talking to our kids early about sexuality. As parents, we are not going to be able to block that information. We are not going to be able to keep our kids from seeking it out. We have to talk to them about the damages that can take place with viewing porn with an adolescent mind. I'm not against porn for grown-ups. Let grown-ups make their own decisions. But for the growing adolescent mind, it can be very, very damaging. And so talking openly about the development of authentic sexuality that comes through masturbation, it comes through fantasy, it comes through one-on-one dating. And we've really, I think, lost the beauty of how those relationships start. I think back to some of my most erotic memories, and it was the first time I made out with somebody that I was in love with. Mm-hmm. It was the innocence of and the nervousness of having someone begin to touch your body. And those are beautiful, exciting foundation of what makes us sexual human beings. And if we're being fed that information instead through pornography, there's just a lot of negative things that can happen. Mm-hmm. Especially around self-esteem. Boys view this imagery and they think, gosh, what's wrong with me? My penis is not 3 feet long, mm-hmm. Or the size of an arm. Girls feel like they that's what sex looks like, and that's the way they need to be when they're sexual, and so it becomes this performance. It's the worst sex educator that's out there. And when kids aren't getting accurate, comprehensive, detailed information about sexuality, they will turn to porn because they want to know what it's all about, and what they're getting is false information. And it's just having a detrimental effect on the whole dating process, the whole internet texting thing. Some people, before they'll go out with somebody, they want a picture of their body. It's like, no, you work up to that. You don't, do it out front. And that's my biggest concern about adolescents today, is their exposure. But it has to be a choice that the adolescent makes to avoid it. When things pop up on the computer, back out of them. If your friend comes over and says, hey, look at this video, you can say, no thanks, I want to develop my own authentic sexuality. Thank you very much. And then we are seeing with some boys that it's causing problems with their ability to be sexual when they do get in a relationship. And that's scary for them. And as a sexologist, it's alarming to me.
Yeah. I think it's so important for parents to recognize that they can put all the controls in the world on their computers, or, try to keep their kids off these devices or keep it away. But they're going to be exposed at some point. They will.
And we can't outsmart our kids technologically. We just that just has to be an assumption. That's the point we're working from.
And it's, of course, not bad or wrong to be curious, and kids are naturally curious about this topic.
Absolutely.
And if you're not having those tough conversations with them at home, they're going to get their information from somewhere else. So even though the conversation might be awkward or hard, or you might not want to do it as a parent, it's kind of essential, especially if you want to keep your kids safe.
Right.
And going back to what you said about how kids kind of look at pornography as, they use it as a learning tool, right? They're trying to understand what sex is all about, or how it works, and sometimes even figure out how to do it. And, you said that it's absolutely the worst education.
It is.
Can you talk a little bit more about, we talked about how it's okay for adults to engage with pornography in whatever way feels okay for them because they're adults. So talk a little bit more about what puts young people, adolescents, even more at risk when they consume pornography. And again, about what you were talking, if you could go into a little more detail about what you referenced with boys having performance issues.
And I also wanted to back up a little bit. Kids are very curious, and they need to have access to images that can help explain some of this. So I think the joy of sex, having the joy of sex on your bookshelf and letting kids look at that. If they want to know, what does sex look like? You can go to that, and it's tasteful, it's drawings, it's real, it's diverse, with diverse bodies, art books. I remember the first time I got busted looking at pornography, and it was in the library in 4th grade, and I was staring at the statue of David in an art book. And I was just fascinated by his naked form and his muscles and his penis and his pubic hair. And so there are ways to expose kids to information and images that can spawn their mind and give them accurate information. And so I would I would encourage parents to, go to a used bookstore, look at art books, get some with, naked pictures or statues, old Greek and Roman statues, pottery, things like that. We've been drawing this stuff since the beginning of time. We have, and we've always been curious about it. So just letting them know that curiosity is normal, it's healthy. Use their imagination to fill in the blanks. Books. I remember reading a Judy Blume book that had the most romantic makeout scene in it, and it was like my go-to, in middle school. It was like, but you fill in the blanks with your own sexual perspective, and that's what I really want kids to do. So why is it difficult for the adolescent mind? As we understand more about brain development, and again, I come from a public health background, not a therapy background, so this is not my cup of tea. But basically, addictive substances in the adolescent brain can have much more damage than if you wait until the frontal cortex has completely formed. And so staying away from substances that are things that can be addictive, which I don't like using the term addictive around pornography, but it can create compulsive behavior. And that can be dangerous, as can gaming and things like that. That thrill of getting a like on your Instagram, or shooting up something, and you get this release of dopamine, and it's just flooding the body with more. And there is a really good Terry Gross podcast about the adolescent brain, and she's interviewing someone who speaks about it very eloquently and easy for the lay person to understand. So I would encourage folks to look at that. What's happening to boys? I'm seeing in my private practice young men 20 to 25 who may not have had a lot of dating experience. They begin to date. They really like their partner. They're attracted to them. They like who they are as a person. They begin to start messing around, and they realize that their penis doesn't work like they want it to. And then they find that the only time they're able to get aroused is when they're sitting in front of a computer watching porn. And that's a dangerous place to be.
And what tips, I guess, do you have for parents who want to prevent this from happening for their kids?
You just have to talk to them openly, or get them to someone who can talk to them openly. This is a common thing I see in my private practice. Parents aren't sure how to deal with it. So get your child to someone who can talk openly about it. Sometimes parents and kids are really embarrassed about it. And so talking to a stranger may help ease that discomfort. But the conversation really, really needs to take place. And it's constant. I mean, I remember the first time my daughter was probably in 5th grade, and we were trying to find something for her dad online, and we're just searching away, and an Asian porn site comes up, and so we back out of it. We go search again, and she was like, "Oh, we found it!" And she's yelling up to his office, "We found it, Dad, but the first time you go to the site, Asian porn is going to pop up. Just back out of it and go to it again, and then the regular website will pop up." So just teaching, I mean, they're exposed to it everywhere. It's in car commercials. It's, sexuality is everywhere, but it also is just popping up on your computer as well.
hmm And going back to what you said before about having those conversations early, I think it's so important to start having conversations about sexuality before your kid is becomes sexually active.
Way before.
And I remember having this conversation with my son, and you know, he couldn't wait for the conversation to end. Like,
Hmm.
just like, can we stop talking about this now, Mom? This is horrible. And I was like, I know it's awkward, but this is stuff that you need to know.
Hmm.
And when it comes to pornography and what you might encounter online, it's going to happen. And I just wanted my kids to know, like, you're going to encounter it, whether you
Hmm.
want to or not. That Asian porn site, it's going to pop up when you least expect it. And make sure you get out, because you can't, I just said to him, you can't unsee
Right.
what you've seen. And there's going to be stuff, trust me, you might be curious, and that's totally okay. I don't ever want you to feel ashamed, but you can't unsee something that you've seen. And there's going to be stuff that you don't want to see, trust me.
Right.
Um,
And then that in itself can create a lot of anxiety around sexuality. Oh, that's what sex is? 5 men ejaculating on a woman's face? Oh my God.
mhm.
And it can be bad from both boy and girl perspective. Yes. Gosh. Oh, no, this is not what sex is.
Mm-hmm. And I think, yes, and I think when we're talking about gender, there it does come into play, obviously, with sexuality in various ways, right? And so let's talk for a minute about that. I think that you know, boys are stereotypically pegged as like sex crazy, um, you know, physical fiends in that way, preying on girls. I mean, I know a lot of parents of teenage girls that are like, those boys are after only one thing. Or you hear that common saying, you know, oh, I'm so glad I have a boy, because then I only have one penis to worry about. If I had a daughter, I'd have to worry about all of them. And there's just so many things that are ingrained that in our culture, I guess, that are damaging to both boys and girls. So can you talk for a moment just about how gender relates to sexuality, and how to foster, I guess, a positive mindset with kids of all genders?
So when we talk about talking to our kids about sex, gender is one of the things that we can talk about very, very early on, because they become aware of their gender identity and differences around gender before they go to kindergarten. You know, by the time they're in kindergarten, they have a good idea of what boy means, what girl means. Luckily, we are in a world that young people are seeing a much more expansive definition of gender. Allowing our children to be creative around gender, letting them dress up in whatever kind of clothes they want to dress up in, talking to them about roles, roles that we see in society, in the home. It's a good, you know, when you're watching kid movies, talking about how stereotypical gender is in many of, you know, these kid films, Disney stuff. And so that becomes really an opportunity for parents to talk about sexuality, because they're also talking about genitals, they're talking about stereotypes, they're talking about non-judgment, allowing, you know, if a boy wants to paint his nails, he can paint his nails. If a girl wants to wear a firefighter suit, let her wear a fighter suit. And having those toys and those dress-up clothes available in the home is a way that we can encourage inclusivity and get away from this binary, you're either one or the other. And now we're beginning to identify lots of different genders, and just letting kids know that, you know, you don't have to fit in a box.
Yes, I love that. And I think it's so important to remind kids that wherever they fall on the gender spectrum, wherever they fall on the spectrum of sexual preference or identity is okay.
It is completely okay.
As long as they are safe and protected and secure and confident and comfortable, and their partner is as well, anything is okay. And I think that that's something for a lot of parents to wrap their minds around too, that they're just not used to thinking in that way.
Right.
And but I think it's really crucial, especially in this modern era where, like, similar to technology, where our kids are kind of 2 steps ahead of us, many of us, in sexuality they are too. They're being raised with an openness that we weren't maybe raised with.
Right.
And they're going to experiment maybe in ways that we were not encouraged to do.
Right.
And that's beautiful and awesome for them.
Right. And I would also encourage parents to talk to their kids about trying. It's kind of tough because you do have those kids who were born and they knew from their first memory that they were transgender or that they were gay.
Mm-hmm.
But we're also seeing, especially in middle school, people wanting to put themselves in a box because maybe they had a crush on their girlfriend. And so now they think they're a lesbian. So they want to be in this lesbian box.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we allow those kids who knew from day one that they were not part of the majority, how do we validate them, but also kids who are more fluid, yet wanting to label themselves with an identity that maybe next year their identity is going to be different?
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of a hard thing to weigh, because you don't want to discredit those kids who, I knew from the, very first memory that I was whatever. Mm-hmm. Or to think that it's popular to put yourself in one of those boxes. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to put myself in that box because that's the in thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then does that discredit the people who really are part of the LGBT community?
That's such a good point to bring up, especially because in my work with teenagers, as the dialogue has become more open about sexuality, there are more people identifying in a broader way, and it does sometimes feel trendy. Right. But I think a key point to that for any adult supporting teenagers, but particularly for parents, is once again to go back to listen, have these conversations, and don't just talk, but listen and genuinely just hear what your kids are saying. And also, chances are that if your child is one who knew from day one that they were gay or transgender or whatever, chances are you probably knew too as a parent or had some sense of it. And if you kind of tune in, you'll probably be aware of it. But whatever the case might be, I think it's so important to just listen and never discredit wherever they are. I mean, and the teenage years are such a time to experiment with identity in all kinds of ways, whether what you wear.
One day they're goth, next day they're preppy.
Right, exactly. To just kind of support their freedom around that. And once again, if it goes back to as long as they're not in harm's harming anyone else. Which this kind of leads me to the question of, well, I guess I have a couple of questions next. Number one, if you do have a child who is somewhere on the gender spectrum that you didn't quite anticipate, or has a sexual preference that you're not concerned about necessarily, but you worry about their place in the world.
Yes.
I think a lot of parents are like, I'm cool with the fact that he's gay, but I'm afraid of all of the shit he's going to have to deal with now. because of that. What do you say to those parents who are worried about the world and their child's acceptance?
I think that's why we need to be politically active, and we need to continue this fight. I mean, you know, you see the sign that the old women carry at rallies. You know, I can't believe I'm still protesting this shit. We're still protesting this shit, and we've got to continue to protest.
Hi, dog. Yes, we do, and I think it's so important to be a voice of inclusivity, of respect for diversity, of human rights.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you have a gay child or you don't, I just think that as parents, it's part of our responsibility in raising conscious human beings. Mm-hmm. To be mindful of that.
And it's a great open door for talking about sexuality. You know, we're going to this rally because we're standing against the transgender ban in the military. Mm-hmm. What does that mean? Let's have this discussion. Why do we think that transgender people should be afforded the opportunity to serve our country, other than the fact that they've been doing it for a while now? Mm-hmm. Talking about giving people rights and then taking those rights away. These are great open doors to talk about mm-hmm. sexuality.
Mm-hmm. And I think it applies also to consent. And a lot of times, you know, going back to that, oh, if I have a son, I only have to worry about one penis kind of thing. No, because as the mother of boys, it's important to me that they understand consent from all angles and how to be supportive and respectful to females as well. And so just to kind of say, it's not just about same-sex relationship advocacy or advocacy for trans rights or whatever. It's just about raising human beings who care for others as well,
right.
in the world, and respect the rights of other human beings.
And those lessons are learned on the playground. In the sandbox. Mm-hmm. And if you're having those discussions, you know, this is why you don't throw sand in someone's face in the sandbox. Mm-hmm. When they get a little bit older, this is why you don't pull somebody's pants down because you think it's funny. Mm-hmm. This is why you don't, in middle school, go up and grab someone's breast or butt. Mm-hmm. This whole idea of consent, it builds on itself. But we need to introduce the topic very early, and we can. Mm-hmm. We can do it on the playground.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That's such a good point. And even as parents, to be mindful of the ways that we communicate and about others and mm-hmm. the things that we say. You know, a big one that you hear all the time in schools is, "Oh, that's so gay."
Yeah.
And now we're starting to understand that that's insulting to a lot of people, but I've
right.
heard adults say that and in front of their kids. And it's important. Of course, you may not be meaning it in an insulting way or even talking about homosexuals, but you are.
Right.
And so be mindful of how you communicate.
And language is important, and language is changing. And as adults, we need to keep up with those changes. Mm-hmm.
Yes. And even force ourselves to step out of our comfort zone sometimes mm-hmm. as needed as well, so that we're coming from a place of better awareness, I guess, if that makes sense. Like mm-hmm. if a transgender person makes you uncomfortable and you know that as an adult, as a parent, go get to know a trans person.
Yeah.
Your whole perspective will change and you'll begin to understand that people are people. Mm-hmm. So let's talk just for a second about, okay, so I'm a parent of a teenager and they're in a serious relationship, and I'm pretty sure that they're about ready to turn that relationship physical and have sex. What do I do?
You talk to them about consent. You talk to them about moving through the physical process slowly. You talk to them about how to pleasure a male, how to pleasure a female. You talk about discretion. You know, if sex is going to happen, you don't take pictures of it. You don't go off and, you know, announce it in the locker room. It's a private thing. It's a personal thing. It comes with a lot of responsibility, and this is part of it.
Mm-hmm. So for parents who want to give their kids that information about consent, about how to please a person sexually, how to feel comfortable in that way and be healthy with their bodies, but aren't entirely comfortable or know how to have the conversation, what resources would you point them to?
Me?
Yay! Yeah.
I do these classes. There are some books out there, but I think being in a class where you can have discussion is more powerful than handing your kid a book.
Yes, that's a good point. And so you, do you work, because some of the people watching this, they're going to be all over the place, all over the world. And so how can people who are not in your immediate area connect with you?
I Skype with people out of the area.
Right.
So I could do that. I haven't figured out the whole webinar thing, but
Yeah.
I Skype with people. In fact, I have an international client right now.
Yeah, great. So they can reach out to you. And how will they find you?
On my website, kelleyjohnsonphd.com.
Awesome. So I just want to make sure that people know how to be in touch with you if they want to do so after this conversation. But going back to some of what was touched on before, as a counselor in a school setting, one thing that I saw a lot of, and this was at the middle school level, not even at the high school level, is sexting.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of parents don't think their kids are going to do this or really don't think it's an issue until, oh my God, they found something on their kid's phone and they're freaking out. So can you just talk a little bit about just how to handle the sexting craze for a second?
Talk to them. I think a lot of parents don't realize this and a lot of kids don't realize this, but it's illegal. Mm-hmm. And there are, in fact, I have a friend that copied an article from the New Yorker about kids who have gotten charged with sexting, and they get on the sex registry list. Mm-hmm. And that's something that you're on for the rest of your life. I tell parents and I tell teenagers alike, technology has outpaced our legal system. Should a person go to jail for sending a picture of their breast to their boyfriend or girlfriend? No. But right now, that's the law. Mm-hmm. Right now in our state, you can consent to having sex at 16, but you cannot have a naked picture of that person you have sex with on your phone or on your computer until you're 18. Mm-hmm. It's not right. It's messed up. I don't think sexting is a good idea. That one fleeting moment where you think, oh, this is going to be fun, this is going to be sexy, this will be teasing, and then the next thing you know, that picture is all over town. Mm-hmm. Which, one, the person taking it needs to take responsibility, but then the person sending it needs to recognize the destruction that can take place. Mm-hmm. And it can be very destructive. I mean, kids have killed themselves over a sext that got out, and just it never stopped snowballing, and they just couldn't handle it.
Yeah, I think it's really important for parents to encourage their kids to, pay attention to what they're doing and be aware of the seriousness of it and the whole legal concern. Whether it makes sense or doesn't make sense, it is a reality and something that as parents, of course, we don't want our kids to step into. And I know that also in the schools, oftentimes schools are very limited as to what they can talk about.
Right.
Sex with kids. But I know many schools that are trying to address this issue of sexting and tech safety and pornography and all that, just kind of like media literacy, sex media literacy with kids. but it's not enough. And I just want parents to understand that they need to follow up that education with conversations at home.
Mm-hmm.
If you know your kid is having that lesson at school, definitely that's a great opportunity to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me what you learned today. Let's talk about that. But also, if they're not having those conversations at school, to have those conversations at home as well.
Yeah. And find the educational opportunities in your community to talk about it. Be careful, because you don't want to shame your child. You want to educate your child. Wanting to flirt with somebody is normal. Now, the mode of doing it is a lot more dangerous than we were a kid. I'm sure somebody watching this video took a Polaroid of themselves naked, and they gave that Polaroid to their boyfriend or girlfriend. This is not a new thing. It's just the form of technology is new and a whole lot more dangerous than it was when we were growing up.
Absolutely. And I think also becoming more prevalent at younger ages than
Yes.
it was when we were growing up too. And I've spoken to so many kids who, when processing this with them, and just a simple question like, well, why did you do that? And I'm wondering, did they feel forced? Was there pressure? And I think sometimes the pressure isn't even overt or even coming from the other person. It's within themselves. So I mean, the number one response has been, I don't know. I don't know why I did that. I just felt like I had to.
Right. And they have an impulsive brain. They're not that part of that final growth is decision making and control of impulses.
Yeah, that's such a good point. So, but if they're armed with that knowledge and having those conversations before they ever get to that point, they'll be less inclined to engage in any risky behavior. So
yeah,
I think that's something to remember. So we've covered, I feel like, quite a lot. And I'm wondering, before we sign off, if there is anything else that you would like to share.
The most important thing, I think, is having these conversations early and ongoing, and recognizing that we carry a lot of sexual gunk within ourselves, but we don't start out that way. It is kind of put on us, and it doesn't have to be that way with our kids. I saw an email the other day whose 9-year-old child walked in on the couple having sex, and the mother was freaking out. A 9-year-old should know what sex is. When they go to kindergarten, they're in a classroom where there's all these reproducing things, whether it's fish or bunnies or guinea pigs, and we're comfortable talking about how bunnies make bunnies. We also need to be talking to them about how people are made. And we don't have to go into great detail. There are some wonderful books. Roby Harris writes a series of 3 books. It's Not the Stork, It's Perfectly Normal, and the middle one, It's So Amazing. And those 3 books will help you educate your child about, like the first one, It's Not the Stork, starts by talking about how animals reproduce. Everything reproduces, including human beings. So there should be they should know how they came into this world, providing very little information in very little bits. Let that knowledge build, but it starts early. And by not talking about these things, by not talking about gender, by not talking about stereotypes, by not talking about equity and marriage equality, we lose the opportunity. If we start talking about it young, the topic just gradually evolves into more sexual information that will be to their benefit as they're growing up.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful advice, and you mentioned some good resources there for parents to check out. And I think also I just want to point out that even if you're a parent of an older kid and you didn't start those conversations yet, it's not too late.
Right.
And I think it's really important for us as individual human beings to explore our own hangups or issues around this topic and work through them personally, so that we can be healthy
and not pass it on.
And not pass it on. Exactly. So thank you. I think that's all such wonderful advice. And I encourage people who are watching to visit your website and check out what services and offerings you have available to them. So thank you so much, Kelley, for talking with me today. This has been
Thank
wonderful.
you. Thank you.
We'll
I'll talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.